this is Jean Marie Ward for Buzzy Magazine. With me today is T.C. McCarthy, award-winning author of the Subterrene War series. Welcome, T.C.
Thank you for having me.
Your first story in the Subterrene War series is something called Germline. Now, I know I didn't know what it was, and I figure our viewers won't either. So could you explain what a germline is?
Yeah, germline in scientific terms is part of a genetic lineage that can be passed along from one generation to the next. And the reference there being, the portions of these genetically engineered semi-humans that are derived from men and women. Because not all of the germline soldiers, not all of their DNA actually comes from humans. Some of it comes from other places to give them special abilities. And so it's just loosely a reference to that. But also it's a reference to what makes us human. And all three books in the series are basically a study of that, of different characters and the way humanity is reflected in each one of these very different types of people.
Germline and your fiction writing career were about 20 years in the making. You had a rather interesting way of teaching yourself how to write. Would you care to tell our viewers something about that?
Yeah, I'll tell you a story first, and then that I did not. I really haven't mentioned at this convention, but I've mentioned other places, and then I'll kind of explain how I eventually got to the point where I could write something sellable. When I was in high school, I knew I wanted to be a writer. Even before then, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And the person who gave our commencement address in my high school was George Plimpton, the famous author George Plimpton.
Yes.
And afterwards, I went up and talked to him, and I said, Mr. Plimpton, I'm a fan. Could you please give me some advice? I want to be a writer. And he says in that voice, yes, don't. There are far too many of us already, and you'd be far better served becoming a banker, a lawyer, or a doctor. And I was crushed. I mean, I was absolutely crushed. So I went to University of Virginia, and at first I thought I was going to go into their writing program there, but things happened where that didn't work out, and I wound up being a scientist, but I always wrote. But I never wrote anything worth publishing. Eventually, what I wound up doing was, I did two things. First thing I did was start joined a writing group, and that got me over the fear of showing my work to other people. But in order to actually learn how to write something that was semi-decent, I had to basically sit down with a short story, The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. And I put the short story next to me, and I rewrote it on my computer, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, using my own language, but using her structure and her way of conveying messages, so that basically what I wound up with when I finished was a total rip-off of her story, but in my words, that I then took and then did it again, and I iterated that process. And what it taught me was structure and how to get emotion across, and how to create suspense, and how to create an entire world without saying anything. Because, in The Lottery, you've got this world that suggests somewhere out there is a far bigger reason for having the lottery, but she never says why. She never says why this thing exists. And so that was just, it was an exercise, but it was one that I found immensely helpful and really kind of kick-started me to, or not kick-started, but kind of bumped me up to the next level.
Okay. We've asked you about your writing. I've been polite for minutes, whole minutes. Are you going to play this whole interview dressed like Hunter S. Thompson?
There's a reason for this, actually. It's a marketing decision in a way, because look, when I take this off, when I take off my sunglasses, I'm a middle-aged, slightly chubby 40-year-old dad who's completely nondescript, right? But when I put these back on, suddenly I'm wacky. It may not look good. In fact, I probably bet it doesn't look, good. But people recognize this from across the room, and they know automatically, oh, that's TC. And so it was a conscious decision. If I'm going to be going to conventions, I'm going to start dressing the same way all the time, and that means wearing these all the time, so that people can recognize me. Because otherwise, I'm completely nondescript, and Look, that's my biggest enemy at this point, is being, obscurity is my biggest enemy at this point.
Yeah, but you spent your entire career cultivating obscurity before you became a writer.
That's true. You're absolutely right. It's so hard to shake that off. I got to tell you, because it is. It's ingrained in me not to draw attention to myself. Period. Not to go out and speak in public. Not to say anything that's going to bring attention to me. So yeah, I mean, you're right. That is part of how I built a career, but I got to get rid of it now that I've chosen this career.
Military themes and protagonists play an important role in your short and long fiction. What makes the military experience so compelling for you as a writer?
I think that one of the big reasons that I chose this to kind of start off my debut writing career was I read a lot of first-person kind of accounts of war growing up, and even up until this day I still read them. One of my favorite is Michael Herr's Dispatches, where he was a journalist, not necessarily a combatant, but he certainly spent a lot of time in Vietnam in firefights and in action. And what I started to notice in reading all these things is just how kind of raw and exposed people's emotions become in these situations, and how all the bullshit from the rest of life about dealing with, broken down car, not getting the promotion, people screwing you over, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, how all that melts away. All that kind of doesn't matter. What it boils down to is survival and trusting people that are right next to you and counting on the guy or the girl or whoever to do the right thing and to watch your back. And I just think that in many cases the things that I've seen actually firsthand and the things that I've read, something about war, even though it's horrific and it's something I would never want my children to experience, there's something about it that just makes people revert back to a fundamental goodness that they have inside them. And I don't know if that makes any sense to you or people watching this, but it's something that I really wanted to capture in at least some of my work.
Fundamental goodness or fundamental badness?
Well, both, isn't that right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, if fundamental goodness on your side and some pretty horrific things can happen as well.
You mentioned earlier that you've spent an entire career trying not to draw attention to yourself. And I think it's no secret, because you mention it on your website, that you used to work for the CIA. I know that the CIA requires a prior review of all material before they are submitted for publication. How hard was it to run your fiction, not through an editor who is 3,000 miles away and never saw you and never knew you, but people who actually work with you?
Yeah. Well, the one good thing, I guess, about the whole process is I don't know if they change out the people at the Publication Review Board, or if they give you their real names, but it was an anonymous process for me for the most part. But it was still scary nonetheless, because I don't have my First Amendment rights, the same ones that most people have. I've signed those away. So everything I write, and I mean everything, has to go through CIA's Pre-Publication Review Board, period. Unless it's something that's absolutely, completely removed from everything I do. So when I write literary fiction, for example, I don't have to send it to them. Germline and the other two books, Exogene and Shimra, I had to send to them. And it was very, very scary to throw these things into that abyss, given that there are some horror stories out there about what's happened to some people, never getting a response, having half the book redacted, those sorts of things. But in my case, when I was all said and done, I had nothing to worry about. It was science fiction. They had no problem with it. As long as I wasn't talking about certain things, let's just say, it was a breeze for me in the long run. But it was still, I wish I had my First Amendment rights back, but it is what it is.
Yeah, it wasn't a good cause, and the books are still out there, and you've published a variety of fiction and other things. So far you've been, and let's keep hoping that the streak holds. What's next for you?
I actually have my first young adult book in the works. We're editing it right now. It's a mainstream young adult book about a teenager kind of growing up and finding his way in Athens, Georgia in the early 1990s, right around the time when the music scene there was kind of, still big in terms of REM and B-52s, but tailing off. I spent a lot of time down there myself, hanging out with some really interesting people. Heroin addicts.
All the sort of stuff that, just plays so well in that letter agency you used to work for.
Yeah.
Well, hey, no wonder you went into chemical. Isn't your degree in some form of chemistry?
I have my bachelor's in environmental science, PhD in geology, and I'm in the middle of getting a computer science degree right now, but I have a lot of background in biochemistry and biology.
Now we know where it came from.
Yeah, gotta know how those chemicals affect the human body, right? Now, I don't even do drugs, seriously, and I don't drink, but I found myself in this situation in Athens with just some really interesting people.
Mm-hmm.
And they were totally mainlined in the music scene and the art scene, and so I got to actually hang out with people like Michael Stipe, who hit on me one night. That's a great story. I lived down the street from Michael Stipe. I live next door to famous artists. I'm still in touch with a lot of these people, and it was just a really, really neat experience, and I wanted to capture some of that in a book. I wrote it. It wound up being more than literary or anything else. I think it wound up being young adult, so that's where we're targeting it for now.
Great. Are you going to get the story about Michael Stipe?
I should have kept my mouth shut. Okay, I don't know if he actually hit on me. Let me back up. There's this bar in Athens called the Globe,
mm-hmm.
and he was notorious for kind of hanging out there and just kind of hanging out with his friends there. It's a great bar, and I used to go there all the time to hang out with my friends. So one night I'm up at the bar getting a Diet Coke, and I noticed that somebody's staring at me. And I mean, look, not like just glancing at me. I mean staring at me,
mm-hmm.
with leaning over staring at me. And I thought it was really strange. And I looked closer and I realized, oh my God, that's Michael Stipe. So I look away and I'm waiting for my Diet Coke thinking, come on, bring me a Diet Coke. And I look back, still staring at me. I swear to you, for 15 or 20 minutes, the guy stared at me the whole time. And that wasn't the only time it happened. So I don't know if that was hitting on me, but I got to tell you, for the first time, I kind of felt what it must be like to have somebody undress you with the, and that was not cool, man.
No, it is not cool, and I'm so glad you had that experience.
It was really uncool.
After that, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think that's enough.
Thank you, TC, and thank you for Buzzy Magazine.